Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is Matt. Now, how many times this past month, have you had to call something or someone out for being unfair? I mean, think about it. The ref at the game the other night, or maybe it was a friend that cheated in a game that you were playing, or maybe it was a sibling. It was definitely probably a sibling, right? For getting special treatment or doing something you didn't love. The list could go on and on and on. When we see unfair things happen, it can bring up a bunch of different feelings or a bunch of different emotions for a bunch of different people. And so I want you to think for a minute. What are the top 2 feelings that you experience when something unfair happens? Is it sadness? Is it disappointment? Is it anger or insecurity? Is it frustration? I know for me, whenever I feel like this, whenever I feel like something unfair has happened, typically for me, I get very frustrated, but it all stays internal. Like, I don't know that I ever blast it out to the world that something's unfair. It sits within me and it wrestles with me and it messes with me. It happens to me whenever I feel overlooked, whenever I feel like I deserve an opportunity, but other people get them and I don't. I just start to question why. And it's frustrating, it's aggravating, and it's never a good thing. Now, unfortunately, we know that life doesn't always end up the way that we think it's supposed to be. We see unfair things happen in life all the time. We see that kid finally stand up to the bully in class, only to be the one that gets in trouble for being disruptive. All the while, everyone knows that it's the bully who instigated things. Or you see a student who sleeps in class and they get an A, but then another person who studied for hours and they get a C. That's not fair. Or maybe you see or you read or you hear about unfair things happening to people around the world, all these injustices going on around the world. When something feels unfair, it can bring up a lot of emotions in a person, which is totally understandable. We want things to be made right. But where's the justice in all of this? So with that in mind, today we're gonna look at a time when Jesus did the exact opposite. Something unfair happened, and a lot of people considered it unfair, but he acted in a way that was completely opposite to how most of us do. Now, for the last few weeks, we've been talking about the things that Jesus said and did before he was crucified. But this week, we're gonna talk about something that Peter, one of Jesus's disciples, did to Jesus before the crucifixion. See, Jesus had different types of friendships with all of his disciples. And this makes sense. I mean, we all do the exact same thing. We've all got some friends we sit with at lunch or that we do schoolwork with, but then we also got a different set of friends that we go to a party with on the weekends. And then there's a whole other set of friends that maybe have the house to hang at because they got all the fun stuff and the pantry stocked and they got a pool. I mean, that alone is why I go hang out with someone, right? Now, one of Jesus's friends named Peter was the friend that you don't want to take to a party. Because Peter's the kind of guy who would say something offensive to somebody, and before you know it, there's a fight happening. Why? Because Peter was there. He's the type of friend who always seemed to say or do something without fully thinking it through. Now, some of you may have a friend like that, and before you start looking around the room and pointing eyes at them, they'll realize that it also may be you. See, Peter was the kind of follower of Jesus that I love, because every one of us can relate to him. We can see the way he lived and listen to the things that he did and realize that's a lot of me too. And in this particular situation, Jesus was finishing up dinner with his disciples after sharing some difficult news with them. He had just shared that one of the disciples who's sitting around this dinner table was going to betray him. Can you imagine? You're sitting there with all the disciples of Jesus, and Jesus says, now one of you will betray me. Now, we know that the betrayal was of one person. His name's Judas. And Judas's betrayal would lead to Jesus' death. Now, even in popular culture today, thousands of years later, the name Judas is connected to betrayal. But Jesus knew that technically all of his friends would abandon him. And that's what he was telling them. And so, of course, Peter is the one who responds of all the crew, and he speaks up without even thinking it through. Check it out what he said. So they're sitting around the table, and Peter declared, even if everyone else deserts you, I will never desert you. And Jesus replied, I tell you the truth, Peter, this very night, before the rooster crows, you will deny 3 times that you even know me. No, Peter insisted. Even if I have to die with you, I will never deny you. Now, at this point in their lives, the disciples had been learning from Jesus' teaching for years. Everything that Jesus ever said would happen, it happened. But our friend Peter was convinced that he would never deny Jesus. There's no way that he would betray his teacher, his friend, the person he's following. But just a few hours later, while Jesus was going through a frightening trial that would lead to his death, Peter was approached by some townspeople who asked if he was one of Jesus's disciples. And 3 different times, one right after the other, Peter denied that he even knew Jesus, his teacher, and his friend. What would you do if your best friend acted like they didn't even know you on the most difficult night of your life? Would you want to get them back for what they did? Maybe you'd want to drop them as a friend forever. Maybe for some of you, you'd feel like I need to betray them in return. I mean, after all, it would kind of be fair, right? Well, here's what Jesus did. See, after being resurrected, Jesus decided to surprise his disciples with a beachside breakfast. Here's what happened. It says, after breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," Peter replied. "You know that I love you." "Then feed my lambs," Jesus told him. And then Jesus repeated the question, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord," Peter said. "You know I love you." "Then take care of my sheep," Jesus said. And a third time he asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And at this one, Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a third time. And he said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." And Jesus said, "Then feed my sheep." See, Jesus was showing Peter that their relationship, it could be restored. And plus, he was trying to encourage Peter to go and lead and care for other people that would follow him in the days ahead. Jesus made sure to restore the friendship back to the same solid place it was before the denial. It would have been totally fair for Jesus to respond to Peter by not even acknowledging his presence, or by losing his temper with Peter, or by lecturing him in that moment. After all, Peter totally betrayed him. But instead, Jesus confirmed that Peter still loved him. And then he reestablished that friendship just like that. How totally, absolutely, and completely unfair. Jesus' response was 100% unfair in the best way possible. Technically, what Jesus did by befriending Peter again, it wasn't fair. But the word unfair has picked up a really negative meaning today. And so another word to describe the way that Jesus treated Peter is grace. Grace is being unfairly good to someone who doesn't deserve it. That was the situation between Jesus and Peter. Jesus was unfairly good to Peter on that beach after the resurrection. And it's an example of how God treats us as well. God's grace is unfairly good. Even though we're not perfect and we mess up daily, God is always willing to extend grace for the sake of that relationship that we can have with Him. I mentioned earlier about how unfair situations can bring up many different feelings within us. When a person is treated unfairly in a negative way, it can create feelings of anger, or frustration, or hopelessness, or fear, or maybe for some of you, it just makes you have a low self-esteem. Well, grace can also stir up different feelings as well. But the difficult thing about grace is how easy it is. Grace is a gift that's given when you don't deserve it. Let's think about it this way. Imagine if I were to Venmo you $10 right now. Let me get it pulled up. Got Venmo, okay? Now, to some of you, this $10, it may not seem like much, but to me, that's a lot. Guys, that's a few Crunchwrap Supremes. Do you understand how good your day is gonna be if you get a few Crunchwrap Supremes? Now, imagine if a friend sent you $10 for no reason at all one day at school. Now, that would be surprising, but it would also be great. So now imagine the situation a little more. Imagine if it was a friend whose feelings you had hurt the day before. You were just a jerk to him and you knew it. And you were mad about something else and they just happened to be the one that talked to you next, and so you blew up on them. They had no clue that you were upset, and then you took your frustration out on them. They were just an innocent bystander, but you were wrong, and then you felt bad, and you'd planned on apologizing the next day. But as you walked up to that person, they spoke first, and they said, "Hey, I know this is random, but I'd love to grab lunch with you today. I just Venmoed $10 to you. You wanna go get something and then we can talk? Let's go hang out. Now, I know that's an example that you may feel like is never gonna happen to you. But the moment I start talking through it, there's still probably something in your heart that feels it, that understands what that would be, that understands the feeling that would happen after that, because that's the power of grace. It means something, and it's difficult to know how to respond to it. It's difficult to take a gift like that because you feel like you don't deserve it. If anything, you feel like you probably deserve the opposite. And so as a result, you feel kind of ashamed, or maybe you feel embarrassed whenever you try to receive grace. You'd rather them be mad at you than give you a gift. Why? Because it doesn't seem fair, and therefore it's hard to receive it. God is ready and willing to treat all of us the exact same way that Jesus treated Peter. When you mess up, God's always willing to forgive you and to show you grace. That's just who God is. But the question is, are you ready to receive it? In fact, the very first thing that I want you to do in response to God's grace, there's two things you need to do. The first one is you just need to accept it. Grace is a gift that we don't deserve, an unfairly good gift. So don't reject the gift out of pride or as a way to punish yourself. Accept the opportunity to have a good relationship with God. For some of you, it might feel difficult to accept it. That's my story. Accepting grace is one of the hardest things that I feel like I've had to figure out because of the way I think about things, because of the feeling I have about things being unfair. But I promise you, it is as simple as just accepting the grace, as just receiving the forgiveness. And then when you mess it up and when you don't get it right, you try again. You start to train yourself to become someone who can receive grace and who can live with grace. For some of you, it might feel like it's a huge relief, and that's a normal feeling too. For some of you, it might feel like, I've just been waiting on this. And so the first thing you need to do is you need to accept it. Accept God's grace and His forgiveness because it's meant for you. And when it comes to grace, being unfair is actually okay because God's grace is unfairly good. And then the next thing, the second thing you need to do is you need to share it. Share that grace. 3 different times, Jesus asked Peter if he loved him. And by the third time, Peter was almost hurt by the question. And then Jesus' response was, feed my sheep. Now, this wasn't literal. This was Jesus actually giving Peter an assignment to take care of not a bunch of animals, but to take care of all the people that Jesus loves and that He cares for as well. It's the kind of assignment that Jesus gives to everyone that has a relationship with Him and chooses to follow Him, to go and feed His sheep, to go and share the grace. See, God gives the exact same grace that Peter was given to us, which means that our job is also the exact same. When people don't deserve it, you show them the same grace that you were given. It's a gift that is meant to be shared. When someone at school yells at you for something that you didn't even do, or maybe you did something accidentally, you show them grace even when they don't deserve it. When a friend makes a mistake that upsets you, show them grace even when they don't deserve it. When you tell your sibling a secret, and then they immediately put it on blast to someone else or everyone else in your family, show them grace even when they don't deserve it. Maybe you got a friend who flex on you at a party, you show them grace even when they don't deserve it. Every situation that can happen where something unfair happens to you, you show them grace even when they don't deserve it. I want you to imagine, what would change if you saw God as wanting to give you unfairly good grace, and then you accepted it? Imagine how different your life would look, or the world around you would look, if we were more intentional about receiving and giving grace, sharing it. So when you head to your small groups, I want you to think about what a fair response would be if you disappointed someone, or you abandoned them, or you let them down. And then I want you to imagine what God's unfairly good response to you would be. Because the best part is, you can be confident that God's grace is unfairly good.